Welcome back, Sebastian here. Time for my review of qualifying for the 2024 Belgian Grand Prix. Pretty exciting session, very wet session as well. Wet track to start Q1 with all drivers starting on intermediate tires. Norris sets the benchmark of 158.899. Hamilton comes on the radio saying that there's no grip on track. Luckily, he would find the grip a bit later. But with 10:30 left on the clock, Norris, Zhou, Stroll, Bottas, and Hulkenberg were the drivers in the bottom five. Interesting, Norris, Hulkenberg, the first two drivers set lap times, so track evolution pretty high, pretty much throughout the session. And you can see comparing, Norris's first lap from Q1 to the pole time, quite a lot of track evolution there. So getting the timing right for the laps is also very, very important today. Alpine at one point, second and fifth, seemed to be working very, very well in the wet conditions. Again, the car really lacking in engine power, so in wet conditions, that deficit becomes less of an issue. And of course, last year Gasly took a podium at the Zandvoort Grand Prix in those very wet conditions. And of course, based on where Alpine have been for most of the season, that seems like a world away, really. With 7 minutes left in the session, Albon, Hulkenberg, Sargent, Zhou, and Stroll were in the bottom five. With 3 minutes left to go, it was Bottas, Norris, Zhou, Hulkenberg, and Sargent. Russell was very, very close to getting knocked out, but luckily he set a very good lap time towards the end to get himself out of that bottom five. Verstappen also impeded by Zhou as well, so that's something that the stewards will probably look at. But given where Zhou is starting, probably won't make a massive difference at the end of the day. But when it was all said and done, your 5 drivers knocked out of Q1 were Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Tsunoda, Sargent, and Zhou. Last two, obviously not much of a surprise. Bit surprised to see Tsunoda there, but he is taking a 60 place grid penalty. So he'll basically be starting from sector 2 with that penalty. So it makes sense not to to set the car up for the race and not really worry too much about qualifying. Q2, everyone's still on intermediate tires through the first lap, but the track still isn't dry. Still isn't dry for almost too dry for intermediates, according to the graphic that the AWS graphic that they had up on the board. And some cars also on used intermediate tires, so their first laps were a bit slower than they would normally be. With 6 minutes left in the session, Russell, Gasly, Leclerc, Bottas, and Stroll were in that bottom five, with the rain also intensifying, so times were starting to slow down, and it was becoming more difficult for drivers to set new personal bests. With 3 minutes left in the session, Ricciardo, Alonso, Gasly, Bottas, Stroll still in the bottom five. Perez would eventually drop into that bottom five very, very close to the end of the session, and then take himself out with a very good lap. But again, still a lot of drivers to come, and Albon, Gasly, Ricciardo, Stroll would eventually be the drivers knocked out of Q2. And Perez very, very close to getting knocked out there, 0.003 of a second away from getting knocked out. That was his gap to Albon. And of course, Verstappen fastest. Verstappen, very, very good session. Not really surprised. He's always been excellent at this track. And I think in these slightly wet conditions, we know that the Red Bull, the aero efficiency is very good, so to kind of trim off the same amount of drag so that you're kind of have an optimal car for this circuit, they're still able to carry quite a bit more downforce, which means in these wet conditions, they can still carry a lot more downforce than the other cars around them, which means that the car is a lot better in these conditions. Q3, into Q3 we go. Hamilton benchmark on 154.011. Piastri only P2. 54.027, and then Perez goes fastest, followed by Verstappen right after with a 153.159, so almost a second clear of the next fastest non-Mercedes cars, with Perez 0.6 back, and at this point kind of on virtual pole position as a result of Verstappen's 10 place grid penalty. Some cars doing second lap on intermediate tires. Basically, instead of pitting for another set, they're just going for and doing a second lap on the original set. Unfortunately, it was kind of an anticlimactic end to qualifying because drivers had kind of just run out of intermediate tires. So some of them were basically just forced to do second runs on tires that had already gone too far. Anyway, none of the four cars that did that second lap improved. And it was basically the two Mercedes and the two McLarens, except for Norris, who goes up to fourth place. Leclerc in the final laps, an excellent laps, came out of nowhere given that Ferrari had, relatively speaking, been struggling quite a bit. He goes up to P2, 0.595 off of Verstappen's time. Verstappen doesn't improve, Perez doesn't improve either, so we end up with a Charles Leclerc pole position for tonight's Grand Prix because of Verstappen's grid penalty. It's definitely a bit of a surprise. Would not have expected Leclerc to be on pole, wet or dry. So yeah, actually, why did I write? Oh dear, that's okay. One sec. We're gonna go get the pen. Okay, I'm gonna get the pen. Okay, you can talk amongst yourselves while I fix. So Verstappen will be starting in P11. Actually, it's P11. Yes. So that's gonna be down there. Yeah, it's a bit of an oopsie for me, but yes, Leclerc will be on pole position. Perez second. So again, best starting position for him since China. Hamilton P3, Norris P5, Piastri Norris P4, Piastri P5, Russell P6, Sainz P7, Alonso P8, Ocon 9th, Albon 10th, and then Verstappen 11th. Really interesting to see what Verstappen is able to do from 11th on the grid, given how strong they were in the wet conditions. But you would think, oh well, they should be able to easily get a podium. But that being said, in the dry conditions, McLarens have looked much better, so it'll be interesting to see what they're able to do. Yeah, I think for the fight for the win, it will be really interesting to see what happens. I think the McLarens in P4 and P5 still in a really good position to win the Grand Prix. I think their race pace, their tire wear is probably going to be the best in the field. But again, it will be really interesting to see what happens. So again, really interesting Grand Prix, I think, in store for us tonight. After that, you have Gasly 12th, Ricciardo 13th, Bottas 14th, Stroll 15th, 16th, Hulkenberg 9th, 17th, Magnussen, 18th, Tsunoda, 19th, actually no, Tsunoda will also be another guy who will be down at the bottom. So it will be Sargent 18th, and then Zhou in 19th, and then Tsunoda rounding out the grid in 20th. So there you go. There's my review of qualifying for the 2024 Belgian Grand Prix. Thanks so much for watching, and of course, I'll be back covering the action from F3, F2 later today. Goodbye.